or at least, reconsidering this empty space as an opportunity space would really improve the way the street is perceived and used. And I mean, of course, I completely agree with, adding shade, adding vegetation, but also I believe that in this case it will be very helpful to introduce some features or, some kind of urban furniture or elements, something that creates somehow this very big parking lot. Oh, something you already have.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It should definitely be activated. Right now, it just serves as a walkway to directly adjacent a parking lot, which is low activation there. There will be the future housing development, I believe, in the space that the parking lot is in. I'm not super familiar with how wide that's going to spread over this lot, but I gather it might take up most of it. So there is, I think, going to be a lot of great activation that's planned there already. But that's not to say that, for the public right away, we can't make it activated as well and wide enough for all the uses that we want to see on there, all the activity. Yeah, as I've been going through and just kind of imagining, if we can't, totally reduce the travel lanes to one or anything like that, kind of how this space will feel. It's still going to be pretty wide, but I'm imagining that there might be more crosswalks, along than there is now. There are definitely worse block sizes in the world as far as, just being so long to get to that next crossing. But I think at least one in the existing blocks, and then possibly two. So this concept shows two right now.
But I agree with you.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Also, I believe that, placing more crossing, of course, will calm down the traffic.
For sure. Mm-hmm.
The perception of the street itself will change.
Yes, right. Drivers will have to be slow to watch out and make it more comfortable, I think. So this is a good example of just how it would change. Again, my thought for this section was that the south side, so what you see here, is pretty good. You have like a pretty nice sidewalk, greenery on either side, and then parking is not always a bad thing. So I did leave most of it with, aside from the new bump outs for crosswalks, because I think it is good to have that option if needed. And especially if you have a great sidewalk on the other side of the street.
Yeah.
So in this case, we're not really changing the south side, and the north side would get a lot more space for activation there. Keeping the lanes consistent, and then again the parking. So that was the thoughts on that one.
I have a question.
Yeah.
What about the lane? Is still the same? It's always the same in all the section, because I found out that in Evernia there's a big difference between blocks in weights of the lane.
I think for Datura, it's mostly the same. We can jump to this next one though, Dixie to Olive. It does change here. It's interesting. It widens out so that there's this just striped median, but it's not a formal median. And then you can see from the section here that gets as wide as 9.5 feet wide, which, kind of like a tiny lane size there. So that's a great opportunity though, I thought out, well, it's always nice to have a planted median that's wide enough for trees. So would that be a good opportunity here? But based on the comments that we've been seeing from stakeholders and I believe public comment, but I might be wrong on that. It really should focus, I think, on the existing sidewalks and expanding those. a median would be nice for greenery, but you can't necessarily walk in it. And the other benefit is that if there was a median here, that would be really nice bump out for people crossing and using those crosswalks. But so yeah, if you have thoughts on that, I could always, you know, change our concepts that we have going here. Still in progress, as you can see. But again, thinking more about changing that north side as and kind of maintaining the parking on the south side of the street. Okay. It will keep it consistent across the blocks as well. So that was a little bit of the thought process. But again, the biggest thing was keeping the two-way travel relatively close to where it is now, because if you shifted it way over here, that could be problematic for the intersections and bringing those together. So it's doable. We can definitely shift, you know, over a certain amount of feet, but depending on, you know, if we're keeping the traffic signals and all of that, it could be problematic to shift way over one way or the other. So this is keeping it pretty much in line.
Okay, so there is a kind of consistency between the blocks.
Right. That's kind of what it's looking like right now. At least for those two. It gets different when you get to the next one, Olive to Narcissus, because we're seeing a little bit more diversity in businesses, less parking lots. We still do have a parking deck here, but this corner of, you know, at Olive is a little bit more active as it is right now. And at this corner here, we're seeing a little bit of, you know, activated street vibes. So it'd be great to continue that. We want to see it all activated, of course, but this might be where you really start seeing like businesses opening up in a cafe style sort of way, where it's not just, you know, passive seating or active seating, I guess I should say. You may, you know, feel more of that string lights and canopy vibe, I think, in this block is a little bit more of the feel, especially because the buildings are taller, smaller, you know, and you kind of want to bring the scale down to make it feel more comfortable. And I saw a great comment. I'm just going to skip to the next one about, you know, what if your traffic didn't go through here at all, which, you know, I know we aren't really thinking about that possibility, but if there were no traffic, you know, what would it look like? What would it feel like to have it end here, or basically at this intersection, and then have the whole activated space there? I think that's an awesome idea that, you know, we're not looking at right now, but just kind of re-enhances the idea of this being an active place with really a cool vista, no matter what you do with it, I think. No matter if the traffic is completely closed off or not. So yeah, concepts are still in development there, and really what we can do. We do see the lanes are a bit wider, so that does buy us a little bit of space as far as curbs go. I think 11 feet is still a comfortable lane width that should work out fine. So probably adjust the concept to have 11-foot lanes here too. And then, I mean, this section has so much potential. I think everybody's seeing a lot that you could do with
a completely different scenario, because here there's potential to transform. Actually, I was thinking about what happens if we basically expand the waterfronts. Flagler Drive or the waterfront itself goes into the city up to reaching also this part with the streets, you know, these corridors, not only going from the downtown to the waterfront, but also it's the waterfront itself that goes inside the downtown. So I think there's a potential in there.
Yeah, I mean, just looking at this, like it's right there. It's there is just so much that can be done here to really make it feel like it's one seamless corridor all the way down to the waterfront. It's that procession, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And there's already so much activity going on in this street, in this area in particular. Unfortunately, the sidewalk is pretty narrow, and one thing I do want to talk about, I'm sure this has been addressed in some way to this point, but it would be really helpful if the sidewalks here, whenever they cross over a driveway or a parking lot drive, if they were elevated, it will help a lot to be able to expand the sidewalk, to still have, you know, cars be gradually coming up into the driveway so that they aren't just hitting a curb, obviously. But I think that should be pretty key to these transitions at driveways, is just maintaining that ADA accessibility across the drive, and having the ramp be closer to the road. There are definitely different design considerations that go along with that, and just making sure that visibility is still good and everything. But I think
also,
that's gonna be
I'm
beneficial.
wondering if we really need such a wide section for the 2 lanes in that part. Basically, I don't think there is a lot of traffic over there. And
yes, this can definitely be narrowed. I think the lane widths are still, you know, not huge. They are 11 feet here. They look bigger than that to me, though. Kind of blows my mind. Yeah, there's something about it. Might just be the height of the palms that make it feel like a bigger scale. But I think that the parking can definitely be adjusted here. It just it feels like a corridor that, you know, I don't know, shouldn't have as much parking alongside of it, because there's just so much going on here. It's I don't know, you would be a lucky person if you got that spot for sure, but maybe we can make it a bit more equitable and have some wider sidewalks to actually get there. But yeah, great seating already going on with the narrowness in here.
Not even that nice, I think, to have a dinner with a car just in front of
Right, yeah, you want to be able to see the park.
Maybe the sea, you know, the lagoon and all this beautiful landscape. You don't want to see your car.
Very true. Yeah, I think that should largely be gone. You know, perhaps again we keep it on the south side if it's really needed there. But I'm almost thinking for this section, for both blocks, I think that we just discussed, both Narcissus to Flagler and perhaps all of to Narcissus, we get rid of parking entirely on both sides. I mean, yeah, it would feel a lot nicer, that's for sure.
I mean, parking is always, you know, a delicate topic.
It is, yeah. I mean, I also like to be able to park close to things, but if I had the ability to bike to things much easier than I did, then I would take that any day. Yeah, that's a general thoughts what's going on. Let me see if I have any other notes. Yeah, pedestrian level shade structures, you know, that would be really neat. And sidewalk upgrade, yeah, those are the basic things. You want to jump to Evernia?
Yeah, why not?
Down there. And I'll I need to have you stop sharing, and then do you have control?
Yes.
Can you share? Okay, great.
I can share it right now. Okay, you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so basically I was working as Chloe did on the other corridor on Evernia Street. Well, I have to say that, you know, our first constraint was that our scenario is a bit conservative in terms that we are not considering like switching to one-way street or big transformations in terms of redesign of the street. We're just, you know, working with improving a little bit the situation that is right now. So I think it was a nice exercise of being creative. You know, without touching that much of the street section. So, yeah, And maybe it makes sense to start with Narcissus flagler.
Yeah.
Block, as we just talking about that. Well, the first consideration that I have is about, surrounding areas. Of course, as I said, for the other case, we cannot consider this just like a street. It's more like part of a larger landscape. And in this case, we have space of the amphitheater here, the Mayer Amphitheater, and this other park with this parking area that still needs to be improved, I think, in terms of programs. So I really believe the reconfiguration of this part of the section depends a lot on what we are imagining to introduce as new use and program for those two areas.
Mm-hmm. Right.
On one hand, I suppose, this parking area will be preserved, or I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, I'm sure that, the area of the Mayer Amphitheater could be somehow reconfigured or reused at least. So they could be much more open to the surrounding streets and the surrounding areas. So yeah, I think this street can be completely transformed into something else according to what could happen in those empty spaces, in those parks. And
Right.
I believe also an important aspect in this reflection is temporality. So how we can transform this parts of the corridor into something else, depending on the period of the year, depending on the moments or the events that are taking place, depending on several items. So yeah, basically my consideration regarding this part is that there is a lot of potential. So I haven't defined any, consideration more specifically regarding, the redesign of this.
Yeah.
I believe there is a lot of space for cars, and my comments are quite similar to the previous one. So I'm not sure if you want to see cars here when you are surrounded by this nice landscape. At the same time, as we can see in this picture, there are not many cars.
Right. Yeah, perhaps they aren't as needed there as other places.
Yeah, because it's not even such a comfortable place where to park, because there's no shade, because it's not that close to attraction points. So I believe this is a good, it's a good opportunity to completely rethink about this and maybe, connect these two green areas into something, to one large area for events or whatever.
Yeah,
Not
because
only
it
these two.
is interesting having the pretty wide sidewalk there behind the amphitheater, because it really closes off the park. It makes it kind of a, you're probably trying to get to the waterfront from Evernia further up, but how can it be more active than just landscape on one side and in the back of an amphitheater? Yeah, I agree that connecting them would be helpful for that.
Connecting will be helpful, and also connecting to Flagler, because there's a crossing here. But still, it will help somehow also the perception of this street, which is quite big for being a waterfront, like a corridor for connecting the water and the land. So maybe a more natural feature could be introduced to connect those existing interesting points. So, yeah, these are my thoughts in regards to this block.
That's great.
Yeah. And then going to the second block between Narcissus and Olive Street. Well, I think here it's important to start looking at the section, because it's very narrow compared to the other blocks. We have two-way street, and I think in this case it's a bit, it's not that comfortable. Maybe that's my so 9.5 wide. It's a bit, small for a two-way lane. And also, it's important to see this section because of the proportion of the street section. So there are quite tall buildings and the street is quite narrow. So the perception, it's a bit uncomfortable maybe if it's so car oriented. So I think in this block more than in the other, it's important to have a shift between from the way it is used right now and possibilities that could happen in case we redesign or reprogram parts of these blocks towards a more pedestrian friendly uses, or more human scale perception.
Right.
So my proposal was to remove these two side parkings in order to widen up the sidewalk here. So it will be much more comfortable, and also the vegetation, the palm trees that are here will be much more integrated. And, I believe it could be like a much more proportioned streetscape.
Right.
And yeah, but it's quite a shady street.
It is, yes.
Because of tall buildings. And, this is something can help to create a more comfortable area because, of course, there is always need for vegetation. So that's for sure. We take it for granted. Maybe there are areas where it's more needed because sun it's too strong, so it's more needed. So I think here it's quite balanced from this point of view. And regarding uses, those are residential blocks. And apparently there are not so many active uses. Also, there's not much space to introduce new elements that could introduce new uses. So yeah, I imagine this street as a quite natural environment, like a shady place where you can walk, going towards the waterfront.
Yeah, there are a few spots along both of these corridors that make a lot of sense in that way, where they're basically just surrounded by a good-sized sidewalk and then a lot of vegetation, kind of at that, I think from, Quadrile to Dixie for Datura, where, the south side was electing to, okay, maybe we don't need to change this so much because it's already a good residential, pass-by spot. I think that's similar in this block. I think there are a few residential places too. So it does make a lot of sense just to have, seating and, dispersed and trees and vegetation, but maybe not like cafe seating. Yeah.
I'm not sure. It will be interesting also in this case to listen to residents of this area
Right. It could be a social spot.
It could be. It could be a place for a small community library or like these small community services that could serve residents of the area. There's space enough for activities to take place. So when the space is not that much, it's important to choose the right one. So needed. So that's why it's important to have this kind of open processes and listen to needs. And so that's why we are here right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so regarding the other block from Dixie to Olive, well, this is a completely different scenario. So the street is much wider, and we have 2 lanes and parking on both sides. And I think the urban landscape is mainly let me do this. No, it's okay. It's characterized by this big parking building, this garage, that doesn't provide any active use to the street. And also from an aesthetical point of view, for sure has some improvements to be introduced. So, and this is something very related also with what were our base conditions. So we will not change that much the existing situation in the streets. So how can we introduce a big change in the perception of also intervening on the facades of the buildings? And I believe that buildings as this garage, for sure, are those that require much more, intervention and improvements. So what I was thinking is maybe we could introduce this, fresh air in vegetation,
right.
colors and new materials and, innovation somehow, not only in the street, but also in the facades of these buildings and similar buildings that could have a more active role in the dynamic of the city. And for sure, another important element is that, a garage doesn't provide any use for the community. So one of our main concern is how can we activate the ground floor of this building? Could we introduce some spots into the buildings or even new pods or small modules to host new business opportunities even.
Right. I love that idea.
So I think this is one of the key points of intervention in this area. And also I believe, in order to create a new graphic appearance of the streets, it could be nice, to unify the intervention on the facade and on the street itself. So, and of course it could be done engaging local artists and can be done in many different ways, even with a participatory process, so that we can ask people what they do, what they want to see building every
right.
day.
Yeah, that's great. I love the greenery you have on it.
Yeah, I think this is, a must we should follow somehow, introducing as much as vegetation you can see, and why not using vertical facades or vertical
right.
So there were my concerns, and also the same concept could be applied to this empty parking area, this surface parking area here, which is quite shady, as you can see from here, because there is some vegetation. And I think it's a good filter between the streets and the parking, so it works quite well, but still there's, as I say, always space for improvement.
Yeah.
And also, I don't know if it's very visible from here, there is this kind of parkland, or this space that is occupied by this barn here.
Yes. It's such a good precedent, they've already activated the space in a great way using that public right away.
It's a good example of how can do it. They need many resources to transform that part, but still the impact of this activation is quite high, and I think it's a good example of showing what it could be done. So yeah,
that's great.
Just support this kind of initiatives. And well, regarding the street the section configuration, I think parking like in diagonal they occupy much more space. So if we want to make this sidewalk wider, of course we can reconfigure this space. I mean, I believe all these concerns about parking are something we should discuss with a wider view of what's going on also in the other streets and in the city and what's happening in the future. So how in the next in 20 years, we will reconsider the use of private vehicles and how they will park and so on. But still, I think it's something we can start discussing now. And then, of course, as everything in the city is a process, so it can be transformed over time. Mm-hmm. This is a good opportunity to reconsider this and gaining more space for pedestrian and active use.
Right.
While regarding the first block in Quadrille and Dixie, I think, yeah, this looks a bit different street. So here it's wide street section. We have 18
yes, very wide.
which is like the opposite to what we just saw in next block. So I think there should be some kind of consistency between blocks. So I believe it can be considered, the reconfiguration of these lanes so they can be more consistent, and you can just define a standard way that can work well for the different sections, the different blocks. And also in this case, I believe that if we are able to reconfigure this and gain some space, we can gain some space for sidewalks and activities, especially on this part, as it's very, very narrow. We just have 8 feet. So it is important to provide like a much more generous spaces to pedestrian activities and social activities to take place. And this happened here in this south part, while the north part, where this new residential block is, it is quite okay, at least it looks like this. So there is a lot of space, there is a lot of vegetation, there is this part that I cover with this.
Yeah, it's a great
look quite, quite nice and very green. So maybe just about supporting interventions of this style, so reproduce them in their spots.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that was a little bit, my considerations regarding this this block. Of course, the perception of the character of this part is completely different to the others. So these corridors, they really change a lot.
It does. 9 feet to 9.5, I guess, all the way to, is it 16 there?
Yeah,
quite a
18 actually.
Oh my goodness.
Completely
right.
different perception. And, yeah, so I think on one hand it would be nice to create a more consistent path between these two extremes. And I believe also it's part of the character of the corridor itself to have different atmospheres. So the first block is more natural maybe, then the second one, block 200, has a much more residential atmosphere, and then gaining in space, so gain this much more urban features that can, of course, offer space and opportunity for new activities, for bars, for terraces, for any kind of additional use and program to add to the mobility layer that we are now talking about.
Right.
So yeah, those were my...
Yeah, that's great. Is there a reason that you decided to go with 13 over something perhaps even a bit smaller?
Well, not really. I mean, I started with this 13. I thought it was enough to reduce and to gain space for the sidewalk. But then, I mean, of course, they're just sketch, so I'm not done
right.
the process. So when I realized as narrow this part was, I start guessing maybe we should go for 10. We should discuss.
Yeah.
I think it's very related with what happens in the surrounding blocks, and having a wider view over the mobility system of the downtown. So yeah, we can discuss more in detail, having this more holistic vision of the mobility over these two streets.
Right. Yeah, that'll determine a lot. Great.
What I believe it will be important is, to ensure this connection between the width of the sidewalks and the crossing, the blocks. Because it will be important to ensure this kind of, this kind of, connected experience to go through these blocks. So it's not something you have, something like promenade. So you didn't have to stop every time to
Right. I totally agree. Yeah. The more, the more comfortable all those crossings can be, the better. You really just want everybody to experience the space freely, as free as possible.
So yeah, I guess we are now talking about, this kind of more structural features and challenges there to add all these additional layers of programs, users, imagination. So how can we really introduce new uses and new atmospheres to the streets?
Right.
It was a quick test of gaining space for a larger sidewalk. Of course, we still have space for cars and mobility, but how can we transform this part of the city of public space? Because at the end, although narrow, is still an active public space, what we are looking for. So what kind of furniture we can introduce? It's not just about having benches or supports for sitting, but also creative uses or spaces for kids. Or I don't know. I think we are here looking forward to listen to some suggestions also from residents.
Absolutely. I'm definitely curious to know about bicycling needs in the area, and if there's a high demand for that. I think that'll determine a lot about what the space should be allotted to, because if we're trying to accommodate bicyclists as well, rather than just on street, then we really have to think about either having that really wide sidewalk to the point of either shared use path or perhaps even bike lanes on the street. So I'm definitely curious to see how residents use the space already, and kind of that perspective as well.
I will also be curious about the impact of soft mobility or electric scooter here in Madrid. Full of this, so there are plenty of them, and it's really a shift. It's a completely transformation of the way people use not only public space in general but also streets. So how all this is affecting the reconfiguration of the street.
Absolutely. So, yeah, scooters definitely do change that quite a bit. Is there a scooter lane, or is there scooters on the shared use path? It's they can definitely change the feel and just the function, I guess, more than the feel of the space. Yeah. Well, this is a great rendering.
Well, just quick test. Actually, this is too big, so I don't like.
Yeah, I realized that I probably needed to pop some cars into mine, where they've kind of been blocked out.
Yeah, I mean, still we could consider, what kind of traffic mitigation devices we can include. Of course, those streets as we are imagining still includes cars. We're not saying that we're going to remove them, but how can coexist, the vehicular traffic, pedestrian and mobility. So maybe we can add some, another layer that is going to making this asphalt surface a bit softer.
Right. Yeah.
A human scale, or at least calm down the traffic and create a more soft atmosphere that can really provide the opportunity to be used in a very different ways.
Right.
So, yeah, I can maybe make a contact. I don't know if that will work well. That's too many colors. But yeah, if we don't want to introduce big changes and we want to transform completely the way the streets are used, how can we introduce some elements that still make the change and invite for a different use of these streets and create a new impact in downtown?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I guess we haven't talked too much about this, but with that idea of introducing more crosswalks.
Yeah.
Do you think, I mean, you have the option between, an street grade crosswalk that has the ramps on either side versus the elevated crosswalk that, it's kind of like can be a speed bump in a way to cars that cross over it. What are your thoughts on either of those treatments?
Well, I think ramps help somehow to reduce speed, no? So we can really
For sure.
contribute to calm down the presence of vehicles. So it can be a good option. So it will be interesting also to go through some references. I don't know if you have a selection of references in this, so maybe it can be helpful to see them, to consider pros and cons of the options. And do you want to say about this, or?
Sorry, what's that? It's a bit noisy in my background right now.
I don't know if you have references of some pictures, some projects, or few options, and that we can have a look now. So
absolutely, yeah. Think about the best place to go to that. Oh, look at that.
Okay. Give it a screen.
Let's see, I think I have.
Yeah, and I'm just going to show some, quick references of something we always like to look to. How can we really transform a concrete surface into something like playful, or it can be support for mixed use. Here we have how we can quick crossing path, so that really make the change. Of course, it depends a lot also on general conditions. So if we have resources, time, will, and engagement to introduce like permanent transformation of the streets and it's part of public space, there's no need to do this kind of intervention, even though I think it can be always helpful to start with a quick test so that it can be easier to see how residents and population in general react to an innovation that is introduced in the space they live. So yeah, why not? It's very low cost intervention and really have big impact in the way the street is perceived. And also one thing I think will be interesting is to think about wayfinding and how we can add this other layer to the mobility that helps people to find the other landmarks of the city. And at the same time, it can be something that is very colorful and fresh.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's very fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that too.
Yeah.
And the intersections on either corridor are really great. At least a good base to go off of. To have the pavement changes there, and I think there's a lot to work, or a lot of good stuff to work with there.
Yeah. And also, I think there are a lot of possibilities, when intervening on a surface. So for instance, here we have something, maybe it's done just with a paper. It's kind of guerrilla intervention, but still, how can we add this digital layer into the physical world and the physical intervention of space? So how can these two worlds connect? So on one hand, physical mobility and the way people move, and on the other hand, we have the way we can interact with all the opportunities that the digital world also provides. So I think something can be interesting. Oh, look, here there's a picture of how we make the alleyways.
Yeah, it'll be. I'm really curious about the cross streets too. So where we have, let's see, back to. So on Narcissus, between Datura and Evernia, I saw another great comment about what if the park can be a little bit more connected to the actual block. I think that's a great idea. Just not necessarily opening up to cars just to make that access point, and opening it up for maybe a pedestrian plaza, and really just extending the park would be great.
Yeah, how can we integrate all these private parkings? Of course, they have to be there, they are required and needed. How can we integrate them into streetscape? There are some art interventions, I think, on these walls. But still, I think, something more like playful, or maybe something urban feature and urban furniture that could have several functions, could be an element to provide this kind of transition between private or park-oriented or car-oriented space to the pedestrian area we are imagining here. So it could be, I don't know, just to imagine like a support for a sitting area, at the same time vegetation, at the same time playful spot for kids. Or maybe we could include some climate conditioning features as water or providing shading area. I think there are so many elements to play with.
Absolutely.
That it's a kind of mix of how many things we could include and how many features we want to introduce here, and how can we compact them in the limited space that we have, because at the end we don't have a very huge surface to intervene. So how we compact all those aspects that we want to introduce into these parts and sections.
Yeah, I'm always inspired by parking day, it's always, it really is, it's almost this can be an exercise of that in some ways, but you can just make great spaces out of such relatively tiny areas. Yeah, there's just so much potential.
Yeah, and also, the visual impact such a event has is really powerful, because it really proves that with low resources and some volunteers and good energies, it's really possible to start transforming public space and improving the place we live. So yeah, I think it's something. I don't know if there's some parking day initiatives in the downtown or West Palm Beach.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
I'm sure.
Yeah, I'd be curious to know if that happens currently.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, great.
Okay.
Yeah. Anything else you can think of that you wanted to discuss? I'm trying to find like a really good picture of a race crossing. There's so many, that have been done. Some a little bit more intricate than others. So that's what I'm searching for at the moment. Because what I want to see is, a crossing that has like nice paving, and ideally that would fit into the vibes of West Palm Beach a bit more than what I'm seeing on these image searches.
Do you want to share your screen?
Yeah, I'm basically just looking through Google right now, but I can do that. Yeah, so this is an example. It looks European to me, which is awesome. Of a nice pavement detail on a raised crossing, but I know that there are more that have been done. I love this effect of crosswalks. Yeah. Very cool. Yeah, so great. These of course aren't raised, but they look raised.
They look raised.
Yeah, something like this, but I know that we can, get more funky with it, get more, a little bit more unique detail to it. So yeah, something along those lines, but it's definitely a better visibility. It's the technique for pedestrians crossing the road. So I think it would be a good thing to at least bring up, see how people feel about it. I'll probably continue on with rendering, showing both options.
Yeah.
But yeah, really thinking about how to get creative with our the limited space on the sides. That's definitely something we're aiming to do. I'll be thinking, yeah, I think it's just going to be something over the life of this charrette that we'll be thinking about. How do we get creative with this and make it unique to the space and the people that live here?
Yeah.
Great. Well, with that, I think we're almost out of time. Is there anything else you wanted to bring up?
For the moment, I think no.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a process, so
yeah, exactly.
Very
it's initial thoughts. Yeah.
So
of the process.
It's a good start, I think. So we will continue to work on this concept and going more into detail in terms of things and images. Of course, we will continue going more in depth.
Yeah, absolutely.
Develop them.
All right. Well, thank you everyone that's been tuning in, and yeah, keep it up because we want to hear your opinions later on.
Sure. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks. Bye-bye.